vinyl community. This is Tommy's Musical Adventures, and today's adventure is going to be a subject that is near and dear to my heart. It is the band Big Star from Memphis, Tennessee. Now, what I'm going to try to do, and this is probably going to take two videos. One is going to focus on my CD collection. The other is going to focus on my vinyl collection. So if you're more interested in just the vinyl, go to part two. If you want to see the CDs, stick around. But I'm going to try to tell the story of Big Star through the CDs. And so hopefully what we'll accomplish is that you'll kind of get an overview of what's out there, what's available, and maybe something that you didn't know about that you can look for. Most of you probably know the band Big Star. I think they're well established in the vinyl community and music community. But it's a power pop band based out of Memphis, Tennessee. Alex Chilton, Christopher Bell, Andy Hummel, and Jody Stevens make up the band. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. Like I said, we're going to go through the history of the band and try to give a good overview. Now, there is a documentary film that's out there called Nothing Can Hurt Me. I believe it is streaming on most services for free, even with a few ads thrown in. Really good documentary. I highly recommend it for any music fans out there, and just to know a little bit about the band. They never really made it out of Memphis, and so as a result, they weren't really widely known until later on in the 80s and 90s when bands like REM, The Replacements, The Posies, Velvet Crush. I mean, there's a long list of bands, Teenage Fan Club, bands that really kind of touted the praises of Big Star and the influence that they had on them. I don't think there's anybody out there that can say they're a fan of power pop music or the genre of power pop and not know who Big Star really is. So it's been a subject that's been well worn and well talked about, and so I don't think I'm going to add any insight into that part of it. But for those of you that are unaware, now there is a book out there for those of you that are inclined to read. It's called Big Star, written by Rob Jovanovic, I believe is how you pronounce it. Forgive me, Rob, if you're watching. Really good book, good overview. This came out about 15, 20 years ago. And gives just a good overview of the story. The documentary, a little more recent, and covers a lot of ground, but it's hard to cover everything. So let's get started with the story of Big Star, and this is going to focus on CDs, and we're going to work our way through. So just buckle in and stay tuned. The story of Big Star really starts with the band The Box Tops. The Box Tops were a Memphis soul pop band based out of Memphis. I think I said Memphis band, so it'd be based out of Memphis. Their big hit was their first, The Letter. Most of you know that song. Anybody that listens to oldies radio, Give Me a Ticket for an Aeroplane. Now, that song was one of the biggest hits of 1967 when it came out. And it was sung by a young, gravelly-voiced, and there he is right there, singer. He was about 15 or 16, depending on who you ask, on the age of him, but he was young. He was very young. He couldn't have been more than 16. Alex Chilton. And so he was kind of propelled into this sort of stardom and fame. And the Box Tops recorded at American with Chips Moman. And so much good stuff. They recorded about 4 albums in the mid to late 60s. This is their second, Cry Like a Baby. This was their first. It's called The Letter / Neon Rainbow. I don't think I mentioned that. Apologize. This is their second album, Cry Like a Baby, the title track, of course, being a big hit. These are the Sundazed reissues of these albums. And so what's available or what's on there. Of course, Cry Like a Baby was the hit on this one. But these are all really solid records, and I highly recommend them. The third album, Nonstop. Now, one of the things that the Box Tops did, and Alex was very kind of disillusioned by the whole Box Tops deal, and one of the reasons being is that they were very controlled by the music company, by the producers, and so it was there wasn't a lot of creative freedom to be found. Now, Chilton with the Box Tops, they toured with the Beach Boys, and while touring with the Beach Boys, Alex learned to play guitar, from what I understand, from Carl Wilson. Carl took the time and was very patient to teach Alex, kind of got him started on playing guitar. And so Alex began to sort of write songs and become his own man. Now this is Dimensions, the fourth album. This features the track Soul Deep. nonstop. Probably the weakest of the 4 albums, maybe, but I enjoy all the Box Tops albums. Now they did 4 proper albums back in the 60s, and that was those albums. And later on in the 90s, sort of out of the blue, inexplicably, and I want to bring this up because I think it's worth mentioning, they released this. I think this came out in 1996 on Last Call. It's called Tear Off, and this is the original band. And there's a photo there, and there's Alex kind of looking cool in the middle right there. They did this album called Tear Off, and it was a little bit surprising because Alex by this point had become a little bit of a prickly personality and not really wanting to revisit his past, but he did kind of come around in his later years, and so he came back to the Box Tops and did some stuff. Now, one of the interesting things, they redo the letter on this album, but they also do a lot of interesting covers. Flying Saucers, Rock and Roll, Wang Dang Doodle, Ain't That a Lot of Love. There's a great song, Trip to Bandstand, which is a lot of fun. Keep on Dancing. It's a party record, and it's a lot of fun. Now, one of the things that people ask concerning this later incarnation of the Box Tops, does Alex sing in the gravelly soul voice that he was known for? He does not. He sings in his later Alex Chilton voice, which is smoother, maybe the word, I don't know. But Alex has this sort of laid-back delivery, but this is a really worthy record to seek out. I don't know what the availability of it is. I'm sure it's out of print. I don't know how common this thing is. I haven't checked Discogs. But if you ever see a copy of this out in it never was issued on vinyl, but if you ever see a copy of this out in your CD bins or anything, I highly recommend picking it up because it's a lot of fun. It's a fun record. It's not going to blow your mind. It's not the greatest thing, but it's a cool record and definitely worth having in your collection, and particularly if you're a fan of the Box Tops and maybe the later period Alex Chilton, which I'll talk about here shortly when we get into that on this video. Now, there's a transitional period in the Big Star story where Alex leaves the Box Tops. He goes to New York for a while and does kind of the folk singer thing, but he eventually migrates back to Memphis, where he starts recording at Ardent Studios. Now, Ardent plays a major role in the Big Star story because it is the home of Big Star. Now, Ardent was a studio that was started up by John Fry, an amazing soft-spoken man who passed away a few years ago, and ran the Ardent Studios. Now, Alex started recording some solo sessions that were finally released on this 1970, and Omnivore Records actually re-released this. Now, this particular CD came out, I believe, around 96, and it has the Ardent label on it. Now, these are just some tracks that Alex had been working on, but they kind of play a key role in sort of telling the formings of Big Star. Now, there's several players that are involved in this, and I'm going to try to go through them kind of quickly. Of course, Christopher Bell is around that time. Now, John Fry started this sort of recording studio school for engineers or guys that were interested in recording, and Chris Bell was one of these guys, and Chris Bell was hanging around Ardent, and Fry would sort of let these guys record on their own. And of course, one of the other players around there was Terry Manning. Terry's still around. He runs a studio successfully down in the Bahamas and has worked with a lot of different people, Compass Point Studios. He did a label in the mid-2000s called Lucky 7, where he was re-releasing a lot of these. Now, this is his album. It came out in the late 60s called Home Sweet Home, a very rare record to find. This CD came out, I want to say, in the mid-2000s. But I had heard the vinyl of this. I wish that I had a copy on vinyl, but I don't, unfortunately. And they're I think, pretty expensive. And I don't know how available this CD is on Sunbeam Records. But Chris Bell is on this CD. He played with Terry Manning. He was one of the guys that was around, and Terry was a major player in the Ardent Studios and Memphis thing. One of the interesting things about this, Christopher Bell is on this recording, but he does this wild cover of Savoy Truffle by the Beatles. And so I bring it up. He also, one of the bonus tracks is One After 909. This is just a fun, crazy record and worth seeking out. It's part of the Big Star puzzle. Part of the Lucky 7 releases that he did in the mid-2000s, he was re-releasing a lot of underground Memphis stuff. Now, he played in the band Rock City, Terry Manning did, along with Chris Bell, and also Jody Stevens, who became the drummer for Big Star. They were all involved in this group, Rock City. So this is sort of the pre-Big Star, pre-Alex Chilton formings of Big Star. And there's actually a couple of songs that Big Star actually recorded later on that Rock City did. My Life Is Right, and Try Again being two of them. And Alex was actually involved in that. And my CD just kind of fell out of here. Sorry about that. Wasn't held on very well. But this stuff has been, I believe, put out by Omnivore Records as a reissue. There was another band around that time, Ice Water. Ice Water was sort of Rock City. So they're all kind of these kids in Memphis playing this sort of rock and roll music, very Beatley influenced and whatnot. But this sort of this and the Alex Chilton 1970 album kind of cover the pre-Big Star coming together of the forces, if you will. And so definitely a cool record. Now, Omnivore put out the complete Chris Bell, and the Rock City stuff is on there, called Rock City C7 States or something. And so that's a record that's available in that. And another compilation that I just want to mention, also on that Lucky 7 label, Terry Manning's label, is Rockin' Memphis, which was this is volume 1. I don't know if there ever was a volume 2, but this actually features some Big Star stuff, but it also kind of tells some more in the Big Star story. Another power pop band, Cargo, who was around, the Hot Dogs. And I want to mention the Hot Dogs because this collection features one of my favorite 45s ever done on the Ardent label. It's their version of I Walk the Line. And those of you who know me, I sing the praises of that recording so much. It's like a power pop version of Walk the Line, and I absolutely adore it. It's so much fun. It's just a great cover, the Johnny Cash song. It also features the single mix of September Girls and In the Street, I believe, is on here. Maybe I'm wrong about that. I know there's I know in the September Girls is on here, the Big Star song. Smith Perkins Smith, which is an album that I enjoy a lot. So there's Memphis stuff and the Terry Manning stuff, but this is kind of a nice addendum to anyone's Big Star collection. And if you can find this, Rockin' Memphis, 60s through 70s, Volume 1. So definitely a cool thing to seek out. But that kind of bridges the gap into Big Star, the band. So Alex Chilton and Christopher Bell kind of come together and sort of in this Lennon McCartney-esque way, this alignment of talents, and they finally form Big Star. They're recording at the Ardent Studio there in Memphis, which the Ardent is kind of growing because they become involved with Stax, and Stax is doing send a lot of their overflow work over to Ardent. So John Fry's doing good business. And David Bell goes to John Fry and says he wants to start a rock label, and he wants Ardent to be that label. And so there's this sort of rock thing going on with the soul thing, and so they've got Stax behind them. And so they start recording what is their first album called Number One Record. And this is... there's a kind of a backstory. It's called Number One Record, which is pretty out there. But the band's also called Big Star. Now, they took their name from a local grocery store chain. I actually shopped at Big Star grocery stores before I even knew who the band was. So I knew Big Star as a name, as a grocery store. That's what it meant to me. But they come together and get this album going on and release it to high critical acclaim. But Stax has such poor distribution. The album never really makes it really far out of Memphis. It just kind of hangs around there. So you have this critically acclaimed album that's not very well heard, but it's just a shiny, perfect little album. The first song, Feel, has this sort of just sort of hard rock bravado, and then it goes into this beautiful ballad, the Ballad of El Goodo, sung by Alex Chilton. Of course, a lot of people know Big Star from In the Street, which later became the theme from that 70s show. And so people like in the 90s, kind of late 90s, kind of got turned on to Big Star through that song. So if you don't know any other Big Star song, you probably know that song. But just an album full of just perfect pop guitar, and it's just this bright, shiny record, and those of you who know this record can back me up on this, just how great it is. Now I'm going to call out, because I've had this discussion a few times, the India song, which is written by bassist Andy Hummel. The India song to me is a needle lifter. It kind of kills the momentum of the album, and an otherwise perfect album. I feel like the India song is this sort of mellotron-driven kind of tune. Now, those of you who love it, I don't want to offend you. I don't hate the song. It just to me feels like an anomaly on this album, so it stands out very much. But it's just a great record. Now, the weird thing is by the end of the album, it kind of turns into these acoustic sort of songs. But Try Again and Watch the Sunrise, this 12-string just shimmering just piece of gorgeous music. But number one record's released, and the Big Star story properly begins. And as I told you, it suffered from poor distribution. No one heard the album. It never really made it that far out of Memphis. And so Christopher Bell, in sort of a fit of desperation, because he thought this was it, this was going to be his big shot, his big claim to fame, he leaves the band. There's a suicide attempt, and I mean, Christopher Bell's story is very tragic on its own, because he believed so much in this music, and then for it to just sort of not really do anything, it really was disheartening for him. So the band, in effect, really breaks up. But at the encouragement of Ardent, and there is a Rock Writers Convention. Now, the movie that I talked about earlier, they go into great detail about this, so I won't. But they kind of bring the band back together, and they play for these rock writers, and they manage to record a second album. Now, Christopher Bell is involved in this album, kind of at a distance, but there is some involvement there. But this is the second album, Radio City. And I love this photo on the back cover. So the band is essentially a three-piece at this point. It's Alex, Andy, and Jody Stephens. And this album is a little more ragged than the first one, where the first one is sort of this pristine, sort of executed thing. This album is a little more ragged, rough around the edges, and it just kind of has a feeling of, kind of falling apart at any moment, which is a very much an Alex Chilton trademark. The idea is to make something beautiful and tear it down. But the melodies and the guitars and everything is still there. So there's elements of that sort of shiny, power poppy, melodic stuff there, but it's got a ragged edge to it, which a lot of people prefer this album because of that. And I can say it does definitely make a difference, because it does sound like a band that's kind of on the edge of something falling apart. Just a really neat record. Now in the early 90s, this album was released as a two for one, and this is the way I sort of got introduced to Big Star, was hearing this in that way. But yeah, this was a twofer, came out on Ardent, and it had both of the albums with some nice liner notes in it, talking about the music. And so that was a way to kind of hear a lot of people that in the 90s, when they were first hearing about Big Star from bands like REM, they were checking this out. Now, at this point, the story gets really kind of more interesting and a little more out there, because Andy Hummel leaves. He goes back to school and gets an engineering degree, moves to Texas, and basically leaves music behind. Alex and Jody kind of carry on, and they're recording with producer Jim Dickinson, and I'll talk a little more about him shortly, in the studio. And they start recording, really, to me, an Alex Chilton solo record, and that album is third. Or becomes third. Now, the album is never properly released. Now, Ryko did a version in the 90s and consulted. Now, the reason the cover's not on there is I actually have it framed, because mine is signed by Alex Chilton and Jody Stephens, my copy of Third. Now, Third has a twisted story. Some call it Third, some call it Sister Lovers. There were several titles this went through, but the recordings were just... It's a difficult album, and I'll just leave it at that. It's kind of scary at points, but to me, what I find fascinating about Third, if you listen to Big Star's Third, it's very different from those first two albums in that, again, the ragged sort of falling apart thing is taken to the next level. There are songs that just kind of just absolutely just stop in the middle of it. It's a frightening listen almost. The album is full of this sort of despairing kind of sadness that carries through it. Now, somebody pointed out, and I think it's in the book that I showed earlier, that the album is sort of a concept album based around Midtown Memphis. And I can see that. I actually lived in Midtown for a while, and I can make that connection that Big Star's Third is Midtown. But the album was never released. It kind of came out in the late 70s when there was sort of this renewed interest in Big Star in the late 70s, and they released a version of Third that was kind of followed, and people saw it. But it's a difficult album, and it's hard to listen to if you're a fan of that sort of, like I said, well executed blend of particularly that first album where it's just everything is in place. This album is not. It's just like sounds and quirky things. I love it. I love it for the reasons probably that a lot of people may not like it. But one of the things I find interesting, and I think I may have said it, but is that this album sounds like it could be like a 1997 indie rock release. It doesn't sound like it was recorded in the mid 70s in Memphis. It's kind of got a timeless feel to it, which is kind of scary. Those first two albums, they definitely kind of maybe sound of their period. This album does not. So it has this sort of timeless sort of feeling about it. And so it's a difficult album, but it's credited to Big Star, so I have to talk about it, and it is definitely part of the Big Star story, but it's hard to call it a Big Star album. Chris Bell is long gone by this point. Andy Hummel is not around, and so, Jody, I think he does a couple of songs on the album, but I think his participation is very limited. It's very much Alex kind of in the studio doing his thing with Jim Dickinson, who's brought in to produce it. So the Big Star story kind of continues, and there's a couple of releases I want to highlight. Talking about Jim Dickinson, he did an album in the early 70s called Dixie Fried, which is a crazy good record that definitely worth seeking out. Dickinson's kind of his own character. Dickinson played with the Rolling Stones on Wild Horses. You can see him in the Gimme Shelter movies, the guy kind of hanging out with Keith Richards while listening to the playback of Wild Horses. He played on Bob Dylan's Time Out of Mind. Produced tons of people throughout the 70s and 80s into the 90s, and involved his sons, Cody and Luther, are the North Mississippi All-Stars and have careers in their own right. But he's a part of the Big Star story. He's a part of the Memphis Alex Chilton story. And so this is definitely a release worth checking out. Dixie Fried. He's got some other solo releases that are pretty great that he released, and he passed away, unfortunately, I think around 2009, and so we lost Jim, but really great character and interesting Memphis character. So the Big Star story continues into the 70s, and Chilton kind of embarks on a little bit of a solo career, and he does this album Like Flies on Sherbert, which is recorded with Jim Dickinson, and so to me, this is like Big Star's fourth album. If you're a fan of Big Star's third and sort of that whole sound, this was released on CD by Peabody Records, and it's just a sonically it kind of follows in that same loose direction of Big Star's third. And if Big Star's third is even accessible, this one goes even a little further. There's a little bit of a hit here, a couple of hits by Alex, My Rival and Rock Hard. And then it's just a lot of insanity. But Jim Dickinson is involved. Some of the Memphis characters at this point are all on this record, and so it's a crazy listen, but this kind of points more in the direction of where Alex was going. He kind of wanted to be more of a punk rocker, and so he did this like Flies on Sherbert, which is kind of a nutty record, and worth seeking out. Now a couple of the other players, of course, Christopher Bell. He kind of he did not completely quit music after he left Big Star. He recorded, did some work at Air Studios with Jeff Emmerich, and so was really excited. And I think the story is that he actually met Paul McCartney while recording some of this stuff. But he had been making these recordings. He and his brother David had gone to Europe trying to launch a little bit of a solo career later on, and recorded some really fantastic stuff. This is his album released on Ryko. It's a posthumous release called I'm the Cosmos. And this album has been available in different forms and fashions over the years. But Chris Bell is sort of the glue of Big Star. He's sort of the shiny kind of thing that made the band that first album is really, a lot of it is credited to Chris Bell. And so if you're a fan of that first album, I think you're going to enjoy I'm the Cosmos, which is a beautiful, beautiful song. I am the cosmos, I am the wind. But every night I tell myself I am the cosmos, I am the wind. But that don't get you back again. There's a song he does with Alex, You and Your Sister, which is a beautiful ballad. And there's a couple of versions of that, and it's just a really, really nice record. Now, Chris unfortunately was killed in a car accident in 1978 in Memphis, late 1978. His family owned restaurants in Memphis, and still do actually, and so that he was working at some of those restaurants by that point. Really had put the music career on hold, but. Anyway, tragic end to a bright life. It's unfortunate Chris never got to see the sort of resurgence and the appreciation of Big Star, and to me that's really the saddest part. But Chris Bell to me is almost like a mythic character in the Big Star story. He kind of takes on this sort of Robert Johnson. There's a lot of mystery. There's not a whole lot of footage and stuff out there on Chris Bell, but he really wrote some really beautiful music. And like I said, the tragic part is he never really got to enjoy his success. He never got to see it come to fruition, and the appreciation that so many people had for his music and for Big Star. But this is the only solo album he ever did. I Am the Cosmos. Like I said, released posthumously after he had passed away. There was a single that came out of I Am the Cosmos at that time, but by that point it was just, there was no interest in it at that time. But now it's kind of become a staple. Another player in the Big Star story and worth mentioning is Van Duren. He's an artist who was good friends with Chris Bell, and Van is still around. He still plays in Memphis, and he did a couple of really, really great records in the 70s. This is his, I believe it's his second one. It's called Idiot Optimism, released again on that Lucky 7 label of Terry Manning. But this song is worth mentioning because it has a version of Make a Scene, which Make a Scene is a Chris Bell song. Those of you who know I Am the Cosmos, they know that song. But another song on here, Mabel, I'm Amazed. Anyway, Van Duren, just another one of those Memphis players, close to the Big Star story, close enough that he's worth mentioning. And so the Big Star story really kind of goes into what happened with Alex Chilton. Like I said, he did Like Flies on Sherbert. Kind of got into this thing in the late 70s where he was kind of making this sort of crazy kind of punk stuff. He was producing the Cramps. This is Alive in London. This is an album out. I think he was recording with a pickup band. Sorry, my book fell out of there. A pickup band around this time. Had done a couple of singles, a couple of 45s, Bangkok being one of them. This particular live album, I think it was recorded in 1980. Around that time, he does a couple of Big Star songs. He does Nighttime and September Girls. He also does The Letter, a couple of blues standards, but it's again kind of puts you in his state of mind. Now, Alex, by that point, I think had kind of washed down the river to New Orleans, and the story goes he kind of quit the whole music scene, completely disillusioned by it. I think the drugs and alcohol probably sidelined him quite a bit. He was doing sort of that punkish thing, working with the Cramps. Taff Falco's Panther Burns is another group that he was around. But then sometime around the mid 80s, he's washing dishes in New Orleans, and his career kind of comes back around. And sort of these sort of punk guys and these sort of indie guys, they start seeking out Alex Chilton. And so Alex starts recording again, and he does a string of solo releases and EPs and singles. This is Feudalist Tarts. This also features, this CD is released on Razor and Tie. This features the single No Sex that he did. So I'm just going to go through these kind of quickly. Blacklist has his version of Little GTO, which is kind of fun. But Alex, by this point, has kind of become a cult figure. Between the Big Star stuff and everything, he's kind of enjoying Second Life as a different sort of guy. Now, this is different than the Big Star stuff. He kind of is more into doing sort of obscure soul songs that he's sort of discovering. This is an album from '87 called High Priest that came out. It's kind of a pop rock thing. Like I said, not power pop like Big Star, but some really cool stuff. Like I said, some obscure soul covers and just some crazy stuff. Volare, Dalai Lama, just some nutty songs. And so by then, he's kind of become sort of the godfather of the indie rock, post punk thing. And so there's Alex now kind of enjoying a bit of underground success. And of course, the Big Star thing is starting to rumble again. And so you have bands like REM and the Replacements and people like that are singing the praises of Big Star. And so, but Alex kind of blows all that off. And it's the weirdest thing in the Big Star story for me, and particularly where Alex Chilton is involved, is that Big Star really was around for about 2.5 years, that they were this legitimate thing. And to Alex, it was just one of his little stones in his musical journey, from the Box Tops to what he was doing at Big Star to what he did post Big Star, which he took very much as seriously as he did any of that. So to kind of put him into that sort of box of this one thing that he did is really unfair to Alex. But so he kind of took a very flippant attitude toward his musical past, particularly with Big Star and the Box Tops. I understand the Box Tops thing because he kind of felt very controlled by it. So in the early 90s, Missouri University, their student council or somebody's getting ready to put on a concert and they want to put Big Star on. So they call Jody Stevens and they ask him, what is it going to take to get Big Star together? And Jody's like, I'm on board, but you got to get Alex. And I think Jody's thinking Alex Chilton is not going to go for this, just knowing his attitude about it. But sure enough, they do. They call Alex, and Alex agrees. They get him out there, he and Jody, and they round the band out with two of the Posies, Ken Stringfellow and John Auer. John and Ken had done a single of Feel and I Am the Cosmos, and so they felt like they'd be great sort of additional players, and there's John, and there's Ken, Jody, and Alex. And so they got together in early 1993 and reformed Big Star. And so the Big Star story kind of picks up part two right here. And this version of the band actually lasts longer than the original incarnation. The gig itself is pretty rough and raw, which is to be expected, but it's Big Star, and they're playing these great songs again. I had the pleasure of seeing this incarnation of Big Star 3 times in my lifetime, so it was very cool. I actually met Alex and Jody, as you can tell from the CD that was signed, and so it was very, very neat. But this is sort of the later period. So 93, they start doing some shows, start playing again, and getting out there and playing live. Now, one of the things that came out in that sort of period, Ryko re-releasing everything, they put out this collection called Big Star Story, which is sort of a greatest hits compilation. Now, one of the cool things about this collection is that the last song, Hot Thing, is a brand new Big Star song. And so they're actually writing songs again and recording, and which is kind of something no one ever thought would happen. But Alex is full of surprises. So in 2005, this version of Big Star gets together and releases an album called In Space. And so the Big Star story continues. This is all brand new material credited to Big Star, and this just got reissued on vinyl by Omnivore, I believe. And so I need to get that. Now, here's the thing. I think the stuff that John and Ken are involved in are definitely more sort of in the Big Star vein. They're writing power pop songs. Some of the other stuff is definitely kind of where Alex is as a solo artist at this point. Love Revolution, Aria Largo, which is an instrumental. Alex was doing a lot of these classical guitar things. But songs like Lady Sweet, Donnie, and February's Quiet, those are definitely, like, if you're fans of that guitar melodic Big Star thing, it's definitely in there. I think Alex wasn't really interested in bringing new stuff to the table. So his participation, he's on the album, he sings, and he's there. But if you're listening to Alex in the solo period, and I'm going to talk about that, they're very much in that vein. An album he did and also in 95, in the mid-90s, called A Man Called Destruction. I mean, it's just full of these odd little songs that he was, kind of these kind of fun songs, kind of fun rock songs. And so that's kind of where his mind was. He just wasn't going back to Big Star. This is an album called Cliches. This is an acoustic. He does like acoustic standards on here. Stuff like Time After Time, Funny But I Still Love You, There'll Never Be Another You. So sort of just him and an acoustic guitar. And one of the better ones of this period that I'm a big fan of is called Set. Where he does sort of these obscure soul songs, Oogum Boogum, Use a Viper. It's a fun little record. He's recording with a trio, and another one that he's just to mention as a solo was a later one, Live in Anvers, which is he had done this pickup band, and this has some Big Star stuff on it. This was released on Ryko. I think this came out in 2004. But again, just kind of in that same vein of where Alex was. And that brings you to In Space. Now, a couple of more Big Star releases, and I'll finish this video out. I've got this one. It's called Beale Street Green, Big Star and Alex Chilton solo. Beale Street Green was another one of the sort of possible titles for third. So this album's just a collection. I think it's quasi-legal. I'm not sure. I think it's an import release. It's called Psycho Disc, which is kind of a take on Ryko. One of the reasons I got this, it has the great single mix of In the Street, which was different from the album version, and a couple of other stuff like some Chilton solo stuff like Barren of Love, which I'd already had, but it's kind of neat to have that. And finally, last but certainly not least, and for fans that just want to really kind of dive deep, is the box set, Keep an Eye on the Sky, the Big Star box set. It came out in the mid-2000s. Great release. It's got a book in here. It's a 4 CD set. It's got some demos and outtakes. The book is beautiful. Got great liner notes, pictures, and it really kind of tells a lot of the Big Star story. There's some video footage on there of Big Star recording or Big Star rehearsing. Really, really, really neat stuff. The fourth disc is Alive at Lafayette's Music Room. It's not the famous gig where the Rock Riders got together, but a really neat set, and for fans for sure. So that's the Big Star story in CDs. That's my Big Star and extraneous. Sorry for this one being so long. The next part is going to focus on vinyl. Probably not going to tell the story, just going to show vinyl records. So it's probably going to be a much shorter video. But check out Big Star, a band worth seeking out. I love those records. They just somehow speak to me in so many ways. And in a weird way, it feels like a group that I kind of know these guys or know of them. And I guess, from my time being in Memphis and playing music around that area, the Big Star shadow kind of looms very, very large, and rightfully so. And it makes sense that Memphis and as a town and this band, this obscure band, not really obscure anymore, I don't think. I think more people know about them than don't, and particularly music fans. And it's kind of interesting how the band has garnered the appreciation that it has, and it's worthy. It's a band that's worthy of its following, and so maybe I showed some releases that some of you may not know about. Hopefully, you can check some of those out. Comment down below. Let me know what you think. Please interact, or I try to interact with you when I can. If you haven't subscribed, do so. Hit that bell, get notified when new videos come up. And again, thanks for watching. Save the Texas Prairie Chicken. See you for part 2.